All right, looks like it's 2:30, so we'll go ahead and get it going. Can you hear me all right? Awesome. All right, I see that we have the time slots that's kind of everyone's starting to fall asleep type time slots. We'll see what we can do about that. And if any time through the presentation today you want to have a comment or a question or insult or whatever the case may be, feel free to either shout that out or raise your hand. Either way is fine. We're both pretty blind, so we may not see you. Try to wave your hand around if not. So our topic is about creating an optional online learning environment from scratch. So I think this has a lot of applicability. First off, my name is Jason Fiske. I'm the Assistant Dean of Distance Education and Program Development at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. I have the pleasure of presenting with William Byrnes, who is through June 30th the Associate Dean still at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, and then we'll be moving to Texas A&M School of Law to start new programming there starting July 1st. And so the topic of today is naturally starting new programming, whatever that might be, has a lot of business side ramifications of it, which will be outside of the scope of our talk today. Today we're kind of focusing on the pedagogy side of it. But if anyone ever wants to talk, there's a lot of really interesting materials that we're applying as far as applying Freakonomics concepts and lean startup concepts to starting new programming. So whether that be as simple as a training for students through a library or all the way up to a whole new LLM program for at a law school. So there's a lot of really interesting material that I would love to talk to you about if you're interested in that type of thing. But on to the topic at hand for today. So our agenda is how we decided to start online programming using the flipped model for classes. And so our programming at the LLM levels at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, we have online LLM programs, while the residential is JD, of course. And we flip the classroom online, and so it's both. So the live sessions are online, but it's synchronous. And we also have asynchronous materials available, so we'll kind of talk about that today. We'll talk about kind of some of the challenges we have faced in starting these new programming using this model. And we'll discuss how we implement it, and then finally we'll briefly touch upon assessing the outcomes for this, as there's been lots of different assessment presentations today, earlier today as well. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it on over to William, who's going to talk about implementing the flip.
So to give you some context of who I am, in 1994 I started doing online legal education in programs. Think about that statement. 1994. I did not misstate, not 2004, 1994. How many people in 1994 understood what the web was? Very few people, but there were some pioneers out there. In 1998, I got the first acquiescence by the ABA to offer online degree here in the United States. I did not start in 1994 in the United States because the United States wasn't ready for me. I had to start in a country that was super advanced with technology and so forth. What country would that have been? South Africa. It's not the obvious place you would think. But back at that time, like France, it was much more advanced than the United States. That brings me to today. So 20 years later, my part of this discussion today is the apologies. Many of you as tech people, I am not a tech person. I'm a tax finance faculty member who had to survive with tech to get outcomes accomplished for pedagogical reasons. That's why I went online. I'm going to explain some of that today as we go through this thing. But I've gone through 20 years of negative no. For 20 years, for my first 10 years in legal education here in the United States, I was bright. Distance learning, technology in the law was a bad word, except here at Cali. Overseas, if you've done overseas conferences, you know BILITA, that's the Cali of Europe that occurs every year. So I did the BILITA conferences. Outside of that context, I kept my mouth shut and stayed on the radar screen. So you wouldn't have known about me. Like North Cali, I did a couple of presentations. I think 2000 was my first big Cali presentation of what I was doing. And people were like, we didn't know the ABA even had distance education allowance. So many of you probably have heard that the ABA is going hybrid now, that you know, there's the William Mitchell Hamlin hybrid models in place. So that's really cool, and you should listen to their lectures too. But specifically today, we're going to start the next 3 slides about outcomes. As an apologist, meaning you're going in front of the faculty and you have to explain why you want to play with technology in the law, especially with the new ABA standards, you best come with, how is this going to make my education better? How are my outcomes, that's the word, pedagogically speaking, we're going to use, how are my outcomes going to be achieved? What are my outcomes there for? After then, what is my outcome? So we can hit the next slide. So I'm just going to give you an example, a practical example of how to find some of those outcomes. In my world, and you probably, if you're anything familiar with distance education, you know there are about 10, perhaps 12 online tax programs already. Why did tax adopt it so easily? Because in my world, tax and finance, software has been an integral part of the practice of big firms, i.e. I came out of Big 4, which was Big 6 then, Coopers and Lybrand, but it's been an integral part of our practice. In 1994, the reason I could go online, anybody here remember Lotus Notes? AmiPro, right?
All right.
So we were using, if you didn't know how to use Lotus Notes, you couldn't work at our firm because Lotus Notes tied into our billing system. Lotus Notes tied into AmiPro, which was our memorandum system, which went into our data management system for our memos. And so people who didn't come through the chain, this audit system or whatever, who didn't know what Lotus Notes was or whatever, neophytes to technology, and I bet you still have those on your faculty today, they couldn't get a job at Coopers and Lybrand because we didn't have time to train them up on how to use our billing system that they could have an end of the year or an end of the quarter billable. Now, tax, software, technology, it makes sense. For your world, which could be evidence, e-discovery, of course that's technology based. Let me give you 2 other worlds for me. One world is risk management, call it anti-money laundering. Another world is wealth management, financial planning. Both of those have outcomes that are necessary, outcomes that have to be trained technology-wise in the pedagogical process of a course. So whether my course is online or not, I have to have online components of a course today. We can go to the next slide. NOS stands for National Occupational Standards. In the United States, you would call that Bureau of Labor Statistics under the Department of Labor. There's like for every type of job, including law, there's a breakdown of what that job requires. They're called occupational standards. You take the occupational standards from the United States, but they're not so well developed here. Look at the United Kingdom instead. In the United Kingdom, they break it down by example. Let's take an anti-money launderer expert at a company. The anti-money laundering hired employees' functions are broken down into 40 separate functions. Each function has an underlying outcome that function needs to accomplish. That's what they're measured against on the job. Underneath that is underlying the educational aspects that they need to have learned, and then finally the behaviors that they needed to have instilled upon them during their learning experience to be able to achieve that outcome of the job. Every single job that you could probably tell me, lawyer, solicitor, evidence gatherer, investigator, risk manager, financial planner, tax, the United Kingdom has broken down that and laid out for you probably 30 to 50 pages of your outcomes set for you, bullet pointed, with explanations. And who created this? Some bureaucrat in the government? The industry came together. The industry came together and said, we need better trained people. And the school said, well, what does that mean to us? Manchester, Oxford, Cambridge. What do you want? They said, let us tell you what we want. And they created these and went back to the schools and they said, can you deliver this to us? Even the big law firms in the UK, magic circle firms they're called. I just gave you the hugest hint on how to go create occupational standards for yourself to then create outcomes, that's the language we use in the United States, outcomes for your courses without having to do a lot of work. Now I'm sure you have, by example, I just got an email today from A&M. They just did a survey of all the law firms that employ their students for what do you need for a transactional attorney. I'm sure your schools are doing the same thing because of this new ABA approach. So that also gives you some information. This is just a much more advanced form of that information that we're now starting to do in the United States. to you.
So before we get into some of the challenges, he mentioned the occupational standards, and so how we went about building our classes and was to start with those occupational standards and to build courses around the learning outcomes that can reach those occupational standards, and then build learning activities that can reach those learning objectives, and then assessment measures to make sure that the students are actually learning. And so a lot of the rest of the talk today will be about how we went about building those learning activities to reach the learning objectives. How do you actually do it? Let's try to do some practical things. So the first, as far as like high-level challenges before we get into that, is naturally you're going to have, anytime you use technology, everyone here, this is speaking to the choir, I personally don't like to put forth any sort of learning activity unless I know it's properly supported. And so faculty has to be realistic about the IT support that can be in place for the classes to make sure that there's proper support for learning for the students. Secondly, differentiation in the classroom is, in my mind, and the way we run our classes, is pretty optimal in online learning environments. And so I'll talk a little bit about how you go about doing that. So differentiation, how we went about differentiating the classroom. In our programming, this was very important to us because we have tax classes that can get into some very sophisticated levels, but we have students coming in, some of them have quite a bit of tax background and some of them not at all. And so we kind of have these different sets of students coming in with different backgrounds as far as knowledge. So differentiation became very important for us in the classroom, and it definitely has applicability across all levels of legal learning. So what we did was we built out study guides, and in these study guides, I'll show you one in a second, it basically was a way to guide the learning of the students in an asynchronous manner. And so these study guides now, what we built out a few years ago and built this system up, now you can do directly through the LMSs. It's amazing. You can build these personalized learning environments right through Desire to Learn or Blackboard or whatnot. And you can measure the outcomes through those personalized learning environments. What I mean by personalized learning environment is you can set up systems where the student comes in, learns material, answers questions, and based on their responses will be directed different directions depending on what the next level of material will be. And so if they miss some material, then they'll be sent this route to bolster that understanding before they can be caught up with other students. If not, if that student can show that they have a mastery level or whatever level that the faculty wants, then they can be sent along to the next level of learning. And so there's exciting ways that this can be done now. We also built in how we flipped the classroom was to have these lectures and our personalized learning environments set up in an asynchronous manner. And then when we get together on a weekly basis in a synchronous environment, the professor, I'm sure you've heard this saying plenty of times before, depending on your background, but instead of being the sage on the stage, will be the guide on the side as far as the learning is concerned with the students. So in that live session online through the technology, there'll be a picture of it in a little bit, the professors are able to guide the students through group work in the live sessions. And so the live sessions are not coming together and listening to someone talk online. That would be rather boring and people lose their attention very quick. Instead, the students are broken into breakout rooms in the classroom, and there's a different question in each breakout room, and then the students come back and they are the ones who present on that questions in the live session. Or you can use, professors in our program have questions built into the slides, assuming they've already done the asynchronous material before, and this is they come in with, instead of the professor talking, they're immediately asked questions, and the online polling, it's pretty much identical to clickers, is done right there live in the session, so the professors get immediate feedback on where the student learning is at that moment. And so there's some very exciting things that can be done. We'll talk about it.
Most large firms and businesses use web-enabled video conferencing for communication within the firm. One reason is cost savings. The other reason is because of the statement above my head. It is a fact that diversity brings better solutions. This is a studied statistical information. Now, firms have done this, they realize this, they're way ahead of us at law schools, big business, and the MBA programs and all this. They get this. the best way to bring a lot of voices to the table, to do it successfully at least, and especially multi-contextual perspectives, intercultural perspectives and so forth, is through technology. You will hear the argument, you will hear this, I hear this every year, well, just teach it as a skills class. Have the librarians and tech people teach people how to do web conferencing, yada yada, outside of the context of my torts class, tax class, what have you. Okay. That's not the way real life works though, because real life works with people in a web conference having a discussion. Let me go to the next slide. Having a discussion who, just like we think happens in the classroom but doesn't really happen in the classroom, where it's just one person, have a discussion and then they bring this information together and somehow some thought, new idea, context, whatever synapses are fired in the brain come together, make a mind map, and whatever, they have a solution, problem-solving method. And that process isn't alienated from the substantive data itself. Secondly, from an efficiency point of view, why would I separate something so critical to the practice and communication element from the substantive learning of the information itself? Why would I force people to go to 2 classes when they go to 1 class? And what am I doing in the second course? Because if the second course is, well, let's not talk about, in my world, tax, in your world, maybe torts, let's not talk about torts, let's do video conferencing and talk about how to make a cake, that's not very relevant for their practice, and they're not going to learn the third part of occupational standards, the behavioral components. The behavioral components, back to that quote on the board, require an interactive discussion amongst a group of people so that corporate politics, firm politics, business politics, whatever, you walk away as a member of a group, not as a single solitary figure who came up with the answer on your own, because that answer will never be adopted by the company. Thank you.
So then we started going about how did we specifically then implement the flipped classroom, because there's a lot of challenges that institutions can face when doing this. First, there's the technology, there's the faculty willingness to build these types of online environments, and how we went about kind of trying to solve this kind of big riddle that's very individualized thing based on institutions.
We encourage you to participate in tomorrow's, to come tomorrow's. We're going to talk about the best practice report. 100 ABA law schools came together over the last 4 years and collaboratively, both in residence through conferences and online through mega meetings, collaboratively wrote this 137-page document, which has seen many evolutions, and it's finally, Cali's going to publish it in a couple of weeks in a final version as the next evolution.
So when we started building these online learning environments, we knew that we needed to start out with something, a very clear structure as far as guiding the students through learning. And so in our world, with our students 100% at a distance, and in our online LM programs, that meant that there was a lot of confusion in regards to various aspects, from when certain things are due, what materials have to be done at what times, and so it was very important for us to set up a structure and a system, and this, as you can see, this is the Blackboard, that through these learning modules to make it very clear as far as where the students need to be at what time and what date, and in a structured one place. Basically, if I would say for online organization of courses, the #1 mistake that I see people make is having information not flow in one place, but have it disjointed and all over the place, maybe located in several different tabs running all the way down. I've seen 15 tabs, and of course, it can be very confusing for students. It's a lot easier if you can have one streamlined place with all the information in, than have it kind of in a disjointed manner. It's also students really appreciate when you can have checklists of items, whatever the case may be, whether that be different what the things are that they need to complete for that week, whether it be course-wide inside the syllabus, have a nice layered checklist that can even have little links in here to the materials would be even better. We found this, that the students really appreciated having that. To build these study guides, as I referenced before, which can now even be built up directly through the learning management systems, we took advantage of a lot of different frameworks of knowledge to construct with the students. And in each one of our classes, we took advantage of concept mapping. And this is insolvency taxation, which I'm sure all of you would love to take. We built out on a course-wide basis the topics that would be discussed on for the whole course. And this would be on the front page, basically, of every study guide. And then we would show them each week where they were existing inside the framework of the knowledge as a whole. So this can be easily done with torts or constitutional law or whatever the case may be based on the individual course. And then the next slides would show this broken down by individual topic. Now, like I said, now we are building these now directly into the learning management system. And before we had this separated out onto a Word document. And we had here the lectures, clicked right here. And in the last lecture, if you were in this room, he mentioned that when you have like a 50-minute video, that can be very difficult to watch online without 30 different breaks or distractions or whatnot. So instead, what we like to do also is to have these videos be 5 minutes at the most. 5 minutes at the most. If it gets more than that, sleepy time, text message time, or whatever the case may be. And don't think that this is only the case for online. It certainly could also be the case for in person, but we're talking specifically about online. So then here, we're able to have the student watch the 5 minutes, read the pages that are specific to that 5 minutes, and then we have guided questions, basically make concept check questions just on an individualized basis, kind of as a form of informal formative assessment, to make sure that after you read this reading, after you watch this lecture, you should be able to answer these questions. And if you can't, go back and review the material a little bit more before you move on.
Because we started out with occupational standards, because we started out with those, and you create a concept map and follow the study guide approach, which I assume as instructional designers you are doing, you can easily map your occupational standards to each task within a studied lesson, which maps throughout the whole course, inevitably through your whole program. And that makes it very easy for you to show the ABA or your regional accreditor, like a SACS or WASP, that you've been filling in, you've been taking the outcome approach to your education. And you can actually show the students because you can write it into the study guides. Now this slide is about context. You've probably heard the instructional design theory, and some people agree with it, some people disagree, like some people are audio learners, some people are visual, some people are tactile, kinetic, whatever. And, but whichever side you agree with, definitely for some learners, they don't get it the first time through whatever means is being presented. It might be the second, it might be the third. Now, as a teacher in a classroom, you don't have time to restate the same thing in 3 different ways, let's say. Again, as an apologist, this gives you ammunition to go to your faculty and say, not all your students are going to understand the historical context, and they didn't have time in class to cover it. And perhaps if you give them a 50-page historical paper, they're not going to read it. Is there a video? Is there an audio? Is there a comic book? Is there... Maybe there's all 3 of those I just mentioned. Maybe one of those 3 is going to be appealing from a learning point of view from that student. You can, through your technology, make all 3 available as suggested reading materials for the historical context and let the student decide which one of those media is best for them to intake, upload that data that they can then later start to process. You can use that contextual methodology that I just had up on the slide for language. I have run the exact same course at the exact same time in English and Portuguese. So that Brazilian, I did over 200 Brazilian learners in a 2-year period. Jason participated in that also. We did them online and in residence hybrid to kind of test them out against each other. And some of the Brazilians, they're very weak on their English. These are government attorneys and so forth, and they're very afraid to learn so we run the same thing in Portuguese and English, and you could, in the same classroom, but Module 1 Portuguese, Module 1 English. So they could do their Module 1 in English, and then repeat it in Portuguese. In the classroom, we actually did that exercise. It sucks for us as, on the admin side, but we ran a class in English, and we ran the same class in Portuguese because it helped some of them get it when they heard it in Portuguese the second time. They had a much deeper learning. Online with technology, we could have flipped the classroom, but we didn't have time to record all that, the Portuguese thing. But using technology, the next time we'd run it, it would have been so much more efficient. It's another way of justifying this to your faculty.
One of the tools that we're able to utilize quite frequently and successfully is discussion forums. And so I really hope that all of you who are involved with the residential JD education side, which I know is most people here, really consider using your Twin or your Blackboard or whatnot for using discussion forums in some way. There's really a lot of opportunity for that kind of partnering pedagogy through discussion forums, where students can have group up in teams. You can present a case and have in the discussion forums have Group A take the majority and the Group B take the dissent type or the concurring opinion, and just have them debate each other inside the forums based on the law and based on the reasoning. And then it's very exciting for the students when they, in a hybrid model, when they are able to engage offline, asynchronously in discussion forums or wikis or whatever the case may be, and then in the live sessions, whether that be live online or live in the classroom, have the professor mention like how one person's comment over there was so great. And even, so if the professor even mentions that once, then all the students feel justified as far as they're actually being read. It's actually being done. And it also is we use it a lot for students to get to know each other a lot more through community forum posts where they can just discuss anything. And one way we are now using it very successfully is we have a forum that we just call Ask Your Peers or Ask the Instructor. And in this, if a student has any question about the class at all, they post it in that forum. And then the students can answer each other's questions through there, and it's a great way for them to get engaged with each other at some sort of level. So we call that Ask Your Peers, Ask the Instructor. And then the instructor checks in every couple days to make sure that nothing was answered wildly incorrectly. So in our flipped classroom model, the asynchronous side of things, what we personally do is record videos in those 5-minute segments based on things and build them into the study guide that you saw earlier. So this is through our Echo 360 system internally through the school where we break it down. Currently, we're taking it to another level. We're using the EdTech tool Zaption. And so what Zaption does for us is it allows us to build in materials directly into the video. And so these ones, as you can see, are recorded here, and then students watch the chunks of video and that's it. But with Zaption, what you're able to do is take this very video, put it into Zaption, and then you can start putting additional things directly into the video. You can add a multiple choice question in the video, a short answer question. You can have discussion forums directly in the video itself. It's amazing to me, I guess. And in the videos, you're also able to, in the tax world, for example, if I'm talking about Section 61 of Internal Revenue Code, I can a link can then pop up immediately and take you right to that code section directly in the video. It'll pop, and you can have it pop up. So there's really, I should get a royalty or something from that. But it's really a great system that we're really learning and starting to implement in the classrooms, and we're getting great survey results from the students using that. And I mentioned before how we run the live sessions. And so regardless of which system itself, there's advantages and disadvantages, whether you use Blackboard Collaborate, Adobe Connect, MegaMeeting, Fuse, whatever system you use for live sessions, they all have their little pluses and minuses, but some of the features in it that I look for when I'm looking for a live system is the same regardless of what the system is. I already mentioned some of them. I need breakout rooms, I need there to be instant polling, I need there to be certainly chat features, they all have chat features, and consistent audio connections. Does anyone want to share about what systems you use and why you like that system or why you don't like that system? Does anyone use any system in the room? What system are you familiar with?
Oh, Blackboard Collaborate.
Okay, yeah, that's
yeah.
What we
I thought
use
it seemed, it seems fine. You know, the chat feature is pretty good. It seems pretty easy for the students to use and get on. I mean, I really haven't had a problem with it.
Yeah, I've had the same experience. Is there another system that someone wants to share about?
Zoom and WebEx.
Oh yeah, great systems. What do you like about them?
You know, they're just, I'm sorry, but I'm not a big fan of Blackboard Collaborate.
Sure.
I tried to use it, I find it unreliable and very clunky. Both of them were much more reliable and much more intuitive to use. So students picked them up very quickly, and even the faculty members could use them.
That's important, isn't it? That's the most important thing, probably, yes.
Connect, Adobe Connect.
Adobe Connect, and what do you like about Adobe Connect?
I mean, well, actually I do. I like, Adobe Connect is full of bells and whistles, and some of them are kind of fun because you've got the breakout rooms. You can set up your different blocks of material in different ways. It's got a lot of customization features. We have a version of Adobe Connect that doesn't have a phone-in option, and the one thing that always goes wrong is the audio. And there's always someone mysteriously, we've even had people who are in the exact same office who could not connect with the exact same equipment for reasons we never figured out. So,
it can be greatly mysterious, can't it?
yeah,
at times.
Troubleshooting the issues is an esoteric exercise at best.
Absolutely. Is there any other systems? Yes.
We've used Blackboard Collaborate. We've had some problems with it, though, particularly how it interfaces on Macs. We also, a long time ago, used DimDim, which is an open source version, which had its own set of unique issues.
Yeah, anything open source can have great advantages, but also issues, right, as you mentioned. Yeah, Blackboard Collaborate actually has a weird thing. This is system specific right now. If you have like the most updated Java, then like your discussion forum chat gets smaller and smaller as time goes on. Have you noticed this in the class? So we've had to like downgrade my Java, which is kind of a strange thing. But yeah, is there any other systems anyone wants to share about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it better to have a system that integrates with your LMS so students don't have to log in multiple times and all those stuff?
That can be great. One-click sign-in can be great if it's integrated, if it's a cost-effective solution.
Because not all the systems can integrate with Blackboard, for example.
Yeah.
Share.
That's one of the nice things about Blackboard. Yeah, all right. Thanks for sharing, everyone. As you see, there's quite a variety of interesting ones that are out there, and a growing number of them, certainly. Kind of staying on those live session discussions, in the live sessions, I mentioned that we use it as a way to differentiate, and so when I break the students out into breakout rooms, a lot of times I'll ask them a question, tell them to come back, and as a group discuss it. I find this is a great way because then sometimes I intentionally pair the rooms with different levels of learners so that they can work with each other and kind of build each other up. And the ways that we try to reach learners who are starting off as a little more advanced learners is to set up in those live sessions some sort of advanced opportunities for them. So we call them advanced planning strategies. And so our professors come to the classes, sometimes it's with a scenario or a hypothetical, sometimes they'll email to the students before and say, hey, think about this, let's apply the materials to this during the class. And then in the class, we'll say, okay, here's your team, go to the breakout room, come back with your planning strategy based on this scenario. So those are some of the ways that we use those live sessions. Would you like to talk about kind of how we plug in publications?
Now, well, I'll go to the next slide though. Okay. Librarians love me. Why? Because I give them lots of topologist talk for the faculties. Again, in my world of tax, so I always go back to my context, not being able to do the research means you can't get the job done. For your client, you'll get fired. Not being able to do the research. You cannot approach or solve a tax problem without being able to have a thorough understanding of the tax tools out there for researching. So in your classes now, our live classes, and this is so ironic, so I know a lot of Luddite tax teachers who teach, use cases and all that. And I've never seen ever in my life at a Big Four firm, have I ever asked somebody, have you ever brought a case out in front of a client, analyzed and discussed it? Has that ever happened in a group meeting? Well, what has happened is, oh, are you using CCH? How did you find that on CCH? Oh, you like DNA better? Where did you find that information? Oh, yeah, we need some new materials on this. We've got to justify our position. That's happened. So if you're performing a case study analysis in class, so in business schools, they use case studies. We use some kind of case analysis and pretend it's a case study, using Socratic method, what have you. I personally prefer, at least for the tax side, the case study method, except I call it the problem-solving method. So you come into a scenario, let's solve a problem. Every problem-solving method in class requires that you can find the materials, the research from this Google universe that's been created for us, Westlaw Next, Lexis Advance, Google itself. And so, as IT people, I'm sure that you've understood how some of these algorithms work. You've heard a lecture about Lexis Advance or Westlaw Next. And so they have some advantages in their searching, meaning that they're kind of a crowdsourcing formula, and what's been found a lot gets pushed up to the top. However, they have a major disadvantage, often not talked about, which Lexis is spending a couple $100 million trying to figure out how to undo, but yet not lose the crowdsourcing potential. If it's based on crowdsourcing, and the top 10, 20 documents aren't relevant for what you want, but your universe becomes closed to the search of what everybody else was finding, how do you ever find a creative solution through your research, which is what you were using research for, generally speaking, if you're an advanced researcher, in the first place? One of your outcomes was to use, you already know what you know. So you know where to find those documents. You know the trademark, like a Matthew Bender, or where you're going to find it in the code. You know what you know, and so you just want no hurdles between you and that information. You just want to go find it. You don't need crowdsourcing for that. And what you don't know, you want a creative solution that isn't necessarily what every following the crowd. It's not what everyone else has found, but they've been searching. So there can be this negative side to it, and so you have to teach people around the crowdsourcing. Oh, what do other people use as search terms? You have to teach them to ask the question, what don't other people use as search terms? But you have to do that in the context of problem solving for the specific in the classroom. In our case, what Jason just showed you, our live classes, which are online, but even in a residential classroom, I think it's just as relevant to ask a student, where did you find the information that you're citing from? What is the process and the pathways used to get there? So I can understand their thinking and methodology behind the information they acquired. The knowledge acquirement is, let's capture the data, and then we can analyze the data. But without capture the data, you never get to analyze the data. So we move on. So you're a mediator of resources. As a teacher, there's a lot of resources out there. There's an expanding amount of resources. I just read the other day, like 2 or 3 days ago, I think it was the New York Times. There are now 4.8 billion web pages. 4.8 billion, and the caption was, you would have to print 480 million pages and kill all the trees on the planet to be able to print the web as it is today. And it was just saying how much resource there is. And then Lexis is claiming that we have over 1 billion documents and whatever. But there's Lexis, there's Westlaw, there's DNA, there's all these new expanding product lines that as librarians, as teachers, even as tech people that you have to be aware of, especially in the tech world. So finally, outcomes. Why do you do legal research? You just copy these outcomes down. These are the general big outcomes of what you're doing with the legal research. Every subject matter, torts, tax, evidence, whatever, has its own sub-outcomes, the use of these outcomes within the context of the client. within the context of billables, which is the most important part of the intern's job, in the context of whatever. So these are starting point. I'm sure that your school is thinking about other outcomes for research and all, but as a librarian, you should be bringing these outcomes to your other faculty, saying, how are you integrating these outcomes for problem solving into what you're teaching the students with what they need to be able to do the job that they're going to be hired for.
And then the final thing is kind of how we go about assessing learning. And I won't talk very long about this because there's been a lot of great presentations and one earlier entirely on the topic. And so, but what is certainly important, particularly in our online program, is to make sure that we have that early intervention of students. And so whether it be through formative assessments and summative assessments that I mentioned before, through our Zaption videos that we have with the recordings, have those built in multiple choices. The great thing about systems like that is just the data that's provided, so that you can know both on an individual level how each person's doing, then also on an aggregate level how they're doing. And so just being able to have data is power as long as you can analyze it. And to know that this concept that was taught during those 10 minutes was not done very efficiently, then you can change the video to make it more effective the next time and try to reteach that material in classroom. It's been very helpful for us. And in one of the earlier sessions, it might have been the one right before this in this room, it was mentioned that having that prompt feedback is so important as far as students being able to process it into their learning going into the future. And so what we've been able to do, and this is how we have an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, in that our online LLM programs are taught exclusively by adjuncts. And so naturally, a lot of people say that's a huge disadvantage immediately, right? They're full-time jobs and whatnot. But I prefer to look at things positively and say that it can be an advantage in the sense that we're able to bring in resources of people to do specific functions. And so we've de-aggregated the teaching model in our online classes. So there's not one professor that does everything, but instead we have one professor creating the online lectures and doing the live sessions. We have a professor that creates the assessments, and they work together on a team to have them all jive together. And this allows us to get feedback to the students within 48 to 72 hours of everything they submit. That's even if it's a final exam. And so by having these kind of spaced out assessments throughout the term, then they get feedback very quickly and then try to apply that immediately, and also gets the professor's feedback as far as how they're performing, what they can do better. One thing that we utilize quite a bit, and increasingly so, is how many people at their institutions are running, how many people have end of term surveys for students? Raise your hand if you have an end of term survey in your classrooms. Oh yeah, okay, so how many people have mid-term surveys in your classrooms? Yeah, interestingly, adding in a mid-term survey in the middle of the course does a couple things for you. If you have an issue with student satisfaction in a class or classes, one thing that we have found is adding a midterm survey. So whether that we 6 or 7 or 8, and getting that feedback immediately, and then asking the professors to try it, and we aggregate the data of the surveys, provide it to the students, and say this is what you said about the class, and then we're doing this thing to try to improve this to try to improve this. We found the students really, on the end of term surveys, they really appreciated that kind of adjustment of the course midway through. Because maybe that particular class likes a certain way to learn compared to different ones. We've implemented Cali lessons in a lot of our classes. There's a great tax build out. I actually heard earlier, I don't see the person's here, but when I say I teach tax classes and things, and when some of these Cali lessons are tough. They can be difficult, and a lot of the time because sometimes the answers I think I prefer this answer or that answer, or maybe that type of thing, but it does provide that immediate feedback for students having lessons like that they can find very helpful. We also, the last couple points is we like to have, when possible, is to build a mind mapping for students, and sometimes this can even be the students creating it themselves. And so then they'll set up structurally the concept mapping, and then maybe have links or things that are built into those, whether it's links to additional information or videos or the code itself. That can be a great way for students to guide their own learning, is to share kind of that type of learning experience. And then we also have, as just an additional way for some students love this, some don't want to touch it, and that's fine with us, it's an optional thing, is for each class that we do, we kind of have a structured system in place where students can go to wikis, whether that be in the classroom or like Wikipedia itself, and they go and kind of update some of the material in that. And so based on sometimes in taxation, for example, there's so many topics, and a lot of them are not even in existence. And so then a writing project that can be done is go create something, add to the learning community of the world through Wikipedia. And so we've tried to take advantage of that. And some students are like, this, I don't want to do this all the time. Others embrace it and do way more than they were assigned.
New skills, new learning. Technology is fun. My last comment's an apology for you to go out in front of faculties. So I've gone out in front of about 60 or 70 different institutions in the U.S., but worldwide, I've done double that number around the world. And I usually go in front of Luddite faculties or Luddite institutions, or even big regional groups of all their accrediting associations, like in India. And they're like, you know, it starts out, technology sucks. Then immediately, it doesn't work for education, or it's second class. And I always throw out there, number one, U.S. Government Department of Education survey in 2009, which was a meta study of about 1,000 surveys, yada yada, from about high school upwards to graduate education, and it found that distance education, especially when blended with residential education, always, 100% always outperformed residential education alone. They didn't go into the specifics of why that might be. Other people are doing that kind of research. It might be because students are more focused, they spend more time. Certainly pedagogy knows that the more time you spend with something and the more you interact with it, the more deeper the learning becomes, or the intake of that learning becomes, and the ability to apply it to a discrete set of facts, future on, which is what we would like to do wrong. But that's kind of the pedagogical stuff, and so faculty needs to hear that to accept what you're saying, but you need to make it fun. I think oftentimes we're afraid. I am a little bit older now, I'm almost 50, and even, you know, well, whatever, bring out a new program, and I'm even like, oh my God, another new program. I have to switch my thinking, and I'm like, geez, they came up with something new, it's so cool, I can't wait to go show it to everybody else on the faculty. I got a new thing. So people are like, oh my God, Byrnes has a new toy, whatever, we want to hear about this. But I always contextualize it, how it's going to try and make their life better. Some of them are pretty smart, and they're like, it's just going to make me have to work harder because emails never made my life better, it made me have to be 24/7. I'm like, yeah, well, because we just don't know how to use it yet. Technology is still, in the context of humankind, really new for what we're doing. The codex, the book, has been around for like the last 500 years. But 500 years relative to 5,000 or 10,000 years isn't so long. We were using oral tradition, right? So internet and email and new programs and discussion forums and video conferencing and web-enabled video, it's new. It's been around 20 years. I was using Lotus Notes. Then I was using real email. Then I was using audio. Then video, da-da-da. So I can't tell you how it's going to make your life necessarily better. I can just fake it till I make it. So that it's a fun exercise for all of us to explore this technology and to disrupt, to unlearn the way that we're doing something. Not because the way we're doing it may not be worse or better or any of that kind of discussion. It's about, are there other ways to approach, other perspectives to approach our students that might help some students who are outliers also learn. You can take it from the ABA approach. You can take it from historically disadvantaged student approach. You can take it from new learner approach, students who are first time in college, so they didn't have the books and the, you know, that kind of pedagogy theory, they didn't have a library at home. Whatever your case, if you'd like to continue to research this area on your own and get your own apologist arguments, one, I have some SSRN papers, feel free to copy my stuff and say it in your faculty. I always said, like, it's in speech format. Just say what I said, and I guarantee the faculty walks out feeling good. It's feel-good papers. Number two, there's a really smart guy, much smarter than me, called Taliwala. He's at University of Manchester. He's a law professor. He was writing on computer-assisted legal instruction in the early 1990s. Europe has been doing the almost AI, not AI, but what we call AI, since the 90s in computer gaming. So anyway, he has some amazing articles surmising all the other articles by other people. So look up Taliwala, you'll find him Journal of Information Law and Technology. And I think finally, everybody here, if you have not read, you should go to the Department of Education 2009 meta-study on distance education. Because when you can put that study down and say, because your law professor will say, oh, law's different. I'll say, okay, the Department of Education, who's our regional accreditor, who's going to come in here and with the Sachs-WASC visit, have, they're going to apply this standard to what we do. Law may be different, but you better have some good explanation of how it's so different that they can't apply the standards that they apply to everything else. And here, by the way, here are their standards for distance education written in this report. Make sure you read that 2009 report. I have links to it in the slides and materials that SSR in. So that's my last comment.
All right, so that's kind of the gist of how we went about analyzing and building a new online learning environment for our programs and what worked for our students. Does anyone have any comments, questions that they want to discuss a little bit more about? Looks like we have about 6 minutes left. Yeah.
Hi, I agree that 60 minutes is too long for a video. How'd you get to 5 minutes? Could you walk us through the thinking to 5?
Yeah, I always say 5 to 10, but for just when I build a lesson or when we have our professors build lessons, we have a kind of a structured process where they kind of break down each learning outcome, and we very specifically have learning activities to that. And if the lecture video is that learning activity, then we require them to have kind of sub-concepts going down in like a charted form, and then there's a 5 minute, there's a 5 minute, there's a 5 minute, and before you know it, you're there. And so, but up to 10 minutes can be, if a professor likes to add an anecdote or something, you can't possibly fit that in 5 minutes. And so we're forgiving up to 10 to 12 minutes, say, but
there's an overwhelming amount of pedagogical literature supporting the 5 to 7 minutes. If you look at tomorrow's slides, we're not going to go through that tomorrow. We just stuck them on there in case these kind of questions came up. You'll see about 20 slides that go through the pedagogical theory of memory slots and so forth. And people aren't. Just last week, I was sitting with one of the top neuroscientists who happens to be in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii, and discussing that. Like, is it 5, 7 minutes? You have 3 slots, 4, 5, 7 slots. And he's like, well, okay, we don't know, but we are shooting functional MRIs of the brain, not of you law students yet. But actually, Aaron, people here know Aaron DeWalt? Yeah. Talk to Aaron, and he's doing his PhD on that. And he has 1 more year to finish it, but he has a lot of data that will give you support for that kind of pedagogical theory of why it has to be 5, 7, 10 minutes, not longer.
Any other comments or questions? Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you organize each of your classes. Did you have the students watch the video first and then read material and then take a little test, or was it vice versa, or was it different depending on your lesson?
So great question. So the question was what order of materials is best to do, and for us that really varied just based on topic, whether and just how the professor wanted to make the videos, because sometimes they would prefer the students to read those 5 to 6 pages first and then talk on those and expand on them. Other times the reading was kind of more an in-depth, intense reading. The professors would prefer to kind of introduce that topic first, and so it kind of depends. And then the formative assessments kind of after both of those were complete. That's the constant.
But there's always a study guide first, because to get to any of that, you have to have a study guide that tells you the professor's approach to what they would like you to read first.
All right, I just have one closing thought. So my closing thought is applying a business principle to education, and that if I decide to do one principle, it is to test, test, test. And so I never assume anything. Well, I'm sure I do many things. I take some mental shortcuts. But whenever there's something that's relevant, I don't try to assume what is the best for the students. I test it. And so that might be in the form of what's A/B testing, which you might have heard of. And so if a student comes into an environment and I say, well, on this one topic, what do I think is going to be better? The showing the video first, or the reading, or vice versa, or something else entirely. I'll set an environment where half the students go to one environment, half the students go to the other environment, and then test the assessments based on both to see which, and then there's my answer based on the testing. And so then, instead of assuming which one is working, it's something that's of high importance. I like to test things like that constantly. Then over years, you can really start getting into deeper levels, and I like to do that across the board with all sorts of things. Okay, so thanks, yeah.
I know a lot of the publishers come out with their own online materials. Can you just give me your impression of that? Do you find that faculty a lot of times just slap it in there and they think they're done?
You want to talk about that? Disaggregation is the key here. So, course in a box, usually they're called. We've never used one course in a box for a whole course because when you go out to employers, what you need, and what the employers need is never, guess what an academic writes as their table of contents. So some publishers do allow you to plug and play and create. So generally speaking, let's take a Cengage. So Cengage, you can I need chapter 3, 6, and 8. And they'll let you have chapter 3, 6, and 8. Now they want you to buy 1 through 20 to get the full assessments and all that, but they'll let you go at 3, 6, and 8. We'll actually might blend a Cengage with a Thomson Reuters with a whatever for each class, depending on what the outcomes of the class are. Since we start with outcomes, it's about what materials achieve those outcomes. And I would not be, I wouldn't say, by example, that you couldn't have two different, in the same class, the same course, you couldn't have Cengage on one side and Thomson Reuters on the other. From an efficiency, I wouldn't tell students you have to do both, but I might say Cengage is what we've selected, but you may find that here are the Thomson Reuters, except that's going to cost you an extra $30 for that chapter. It's up to you. I wouldn't be, or vice versa, say you choose which one, but the assessments have to flow through to the teacher. What you need to have learned, your outcome for our discussion of the scenario in the live class is as follows. Let the student take control of their education because I just moderate between all these various resources. So I am totally agnostic as to the publisher, and I have yet to find a book that meets one of my course needs. And I would love to do it. I'd love to find that book to make my life easier.
Don't you find a lot of faculty, though, particularly Luddites or people that are in their 50 plus, take the course in a box and slap it in and think, okay, I've done my hybrid part.
I know for sure. I see that just for what we do. I don't. But that is there, and that's why the course in a box models are working. However, this is statistically true. There's still more print going out in the law world here in the United States than there is electronic. Not in the professional world, but in the law world, the law school world. Sorry, law school world. And that tells me that we're still more than a majority Luddite. We're still more than a majority of faculty who are not using technology effectively in the classroom. They are still requiring students to go out and buy paper books. Now, is that the publishers not leading, or is it the faculty not pushing the publishers? Is it the faculty not wanting to write in a multimedia electronic format where they record lectures for their books, where they do this, where they do the assessments? I don't know the answer to that, but there is a problem. Because millennials come with a different set of learning tools than our generation did. How old you are, for my generation. And they just have a different set. That is pretty accepted. I don't know if it's pedagogically true. I've never seen a study on millennials. There can't be longitudinal studies on millennials. They're still too young to have a longitudinal study on them. But it is commonly thought that they come with a different set of learning tools, i.e. the phone and this, and they play computer games or whatever it is. That's my last comment.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. We appreciate it.